Well, welcome to our Remodeling Outlook webinar. We're going to talk about where we're going in 2023. I am Todd Tomalak, principal of our Building Products Advisory Practice. I have with me Matt Samson. We have just a very unique discussion that we need to have around where the industry is going. Before we jump into that, several things, some background on us. So the Zonda advisory team is a very kind of broad and diverse group that can be brought to bear on a number of custom projects, everything from building product forecasts to professional voice of customer studies and anything in housing. So everything from land residual analysis to master plan work, you name it. We have people that are very close to the market. Our information is here. If you'd like to get more information, there will be a survey immediately after the end of the webinar. Please stay on for that. If you want more information, you can click there and get access to it. Also, very excited about this. Our Building Products Outlook product is going to be available January 2023. That's just around the corner. This is essentially all of our curated best insights from all the different data pieces that we're seeing that apply to building products. So this is really designed to be a concise way for your executive team or your strategy team or your finance team to hear from us on what's happening in the industry. This group will get our forecast on the home improvement and a number of other things very early, a lot of real-time color, and also great information for your analyst. If you're interested in that, take the survey at the end. You can get more information here. Also, if you're looking for data on new construction for building product companies, Building Product Pro by Zonda is a really interesting data platform. Of course, as the market begins to pivot, we're seeing shifts between price points, between regions. All of that at the builder and local level is all aggregated here. So it's really useful thinking about, when the next bounce happens, this is where we'll be able to measure where all that dry powder is. So useful for your team. And then just a few other things. We have two really interesting solutions here for builders. For some of the builders that are paying attention. One is Livable, which is North America's largest online new home listing destination. It's a platform for leads and opportunity to list for the builders, and it's all focused on new construction. And then also on the right, Zonda Virtual, incredible. I've seen some of the output that this team has put together, interactive floor plans, full immersive virtual reality, down to the entire community level. You can walk between houses. So if you're a builder and that's something that's interesting to you, you have access to accessing that there too. And then several other upcoming events you should have on your radar. Architect Live, November 7th through 9th in DC. If you're going to attend that, here's the code for $100 savings to attend that. Also AHF Live in Chicago, and then the Dealmakers Conference, December 1st in Tampa. So let's get into the agenda. We're going to talk about first the very unusual set of conditions that are going on coming into 2023 for home improvement. Then we're going to pivot just a bit and talk about, for the projects that are coming online for home improvement, the blend between pro remodeling and DIYing, and a noticeable shift that we're seeing. We're calling it the blend trend. More on that. Matt will take you into some of the primary research that we're doing there. Then we're going to talk about some longer term considerations that we really need to have on your radar as you think about, after 2023, what should you believe about the overall level of demand that will impact the shape of whatever bounce happens then? And then I'll give you a new forecast, which you have not seen before for home improvement, and some summary thoughts. So let's get into it. The building product companies are in a really unique space right now. Housing starts are dropping rapidly. And yet if you're a building product company that sells to builders, you have had a long backlog for about 2.5 years now. And right now you're looking at an even larger one. The current numbers of homes built under construction, we're talking mid-build construction phase where building product companies are selling to, has never been higher in the history of the data. And what's really unique about the makeup of this number coming into 2023 is just how strong the multifamily has been the last few months, meaning these are all units that will dollarize in the first half of 2023. It means that a lot of building product companies are still seeing strong revenue growth. They appear to have pricing power. It looks like they're gaining market share, that they're a little bit cycle immune. And then the question is, how long can this continue until the music slows or we begin to see the broader market cool down? Because we are seeing it in some of the headline numbers ancillary to the market. So here's just two. Existing home sales, if you've been tracking this since January, has fallen roughly 3 times the pace of what we saw in the mid 2000s. Now, this is a volume number. This does not mean we think at all this is what's going to happen for that we're reliving the mid 2000s. That's not the case. But the market is slowing very quickly in terms of people moving from one location to the next because it's so expensive to get out of your home and into an equivalent home at the new payment level. At right, perhaps you saw the new data on home prices from S&P. Dropped 2 days ago. We saw about a 2-point decline month over month in overall home price, and that likely understates the amount of decline because of just the way the data is reported. There's a several-month lag. There's a bunch of averaging that goes on there. But we are seeing a directional weakening in home prices, which historically the thumb rule was a 1% swing in home prices roughly caused about the same swing in nominal remodeling spending. So that's concerning. But I'd like to just take a step back and show you something else that I think makes us, have to really reassess what we believe is going to happen for the overall home improvement market. So let's just think about 2 questions. You're getting pushed a poll right now on these 2 questions. So please tell us your response. Yes or no, do you believe that now is a good time to buy a home? And then number 2, putting yourself in kind of the mind of someone who buys things in the home, do you think it's a good time to buy those things? So we're talking about furniture, appliances, recreational things, but things you put inside the home. Is now a good time to buy those things? What do you think? And we'll just give you a minute to fill those out. The reason I like this question, a little bit of backdrop. On Friday, we're going to see new numbers from the University of Michigan. They've been collecting consumer sentiment on various parts of the economy for well over 40 years. These are 2 questions that they've been asking since the late 70s. Really, really interesting to think about as we think about where investment in the home and home improvement is going. So I'm curious to see where this group comes in at. Okay, so the numbers that we have, now this is fascinating. Is now a good time to buy a home? 20% who are watching said yes. And then is now a good time to buy durables in the home? 42% yes. That's interesting. So here's how consumers have responded. Let me just take control of the screen here. On the same question. So here's the data from every quarter since the late 1970s, which of course was the period when we were last facing the same type of inflation and the same type of tightening. In the upper right-hand corner would be all the times when households felt that it was generally a good time to buy things in the home and buy another home. And where we are currently, you can see at the bottom left-hand corner, fall 2022, we have never been lower in the history of the data in terms of the percentage of households that feel it's a good time to not just buy a home, but to buy the things in the home. In fact, fewer general consumers feel it's a good time to buy things in the home than this group responded, although we're roughly the same balance in terms of buying a different home. Why does this matter? When you see a number like this, that's an outlier. It's not just an outlier would have been where we were in fall of last year when business was still doing pretty well. We're in an outlier among the outlier situation right here, which should cause us to just take a step back and think long and hard about what we believe is happening for home improvement. For example, just as an illustration, let's think about an outlier among the outlier, what that means for in generally thinking about data. So imagine that it's late at night, you go to a Starbucks and you order a latte. And rather than pour you a latte, the barista pours you a whiskey. Well, that would be an outlier among the outlier. It's not just unusual. Something unusual would be getting the wrong menu item. An outlier beyond that would be getting something that's not even on the menu. They don't serve whiskey at Starbucks. So what would you need to do? It means that you really have to take a step back and reassess whether or not what you believe about the market is really accurate. In that case, you'd have to take a step back and even maybe you're not in a Starbucks at all. Maybe you're in a different type of location and you better reassess if you want to be there. Why does this matter? Well, taking a step back and thinking about the foundation of home improvement spending, there's really 2 questions that we have to answer. As the market begins to turn, do we believe that we're seeing demand deferral or demand destruction? And how I like to think about kind of decomposing those 2 things, in order to remodel, we need 2 things. We need the desire or the need to remodel, and we need the ability to pay for that remodel. That can be access to a home equity loan, that can be, home price appreciation, that can be income growth, but we need both of those things to come together. Typically, what we've seen in years past when the market cycled was what got handicapped was the ability to pay for the remodel. But there was still the desire to pull the trigger on a project, and other things would tend to fester, which means it was a deferred remodeling spend. We saw this in the early 80s. The last time we saw the Fed fight inflation, there was a bunch of postponed remodeling activity. There still was the desire to move out, the desire to remodel and change the home, but we basically saw it slow while interest rates went up very rapidly. And then once prices stabilized, we saw a huge surge happen in home improvement the following year, between 20 and 90%, depending on product category. So we've seen this before. Inflation in the past, fighting inflation tend to lead to deferred remodeling spending. In order to believe that we're seeing demand destruction, which means removal, not deferral, we'd have to see a significant enough change where that household is no longer in the circumstance where they even want to remodel. Maybe they're moving in, leaving the house entirely, walking away, which is what we saw in the mid 2000s. They're just leaving the idea of home ownership. But those are two very different concepts. So here's how I'm thinking about those kind of two ideas coming into 2023. We need to think about desire for remodeling, the ability, and plus some mitigating factors, which might cause this situation to be a little bit different than usual. Regarding desire to remodel, we have a number of factors that are impacting that right now that we need to think about carefully. There's a wave of household formation that's going on right now, this deferred wave of people moving, not just out of their mom and dad's home, but putting off other life choices. And now they're finally getting to a point where they wanted to either live in an apartment or live in their own home. That's just happening now. We're seeing the millennials form homes. We've also got this unique backdrop, and I'm going to show you a slide on this in a minute, of this unusual mix of homes that were built about 20 years ago in the early 2000s, which really the quality level was like okay, but a lot of the fit and finish is quite worn out. That's going to drive a wave of spending. And then also there's a matching problem. And I'm going to show you some details on this too. And essentially what the matching problem means is that for the last 3 years, we've been in a situation where people who bought existing homes had to buy what was available, usually while fighting off other potential buyers, which meant that they had to buy as fast as they could without really doing their diligence. It likely wasn't the perfect home for them, but they had to buy a home. And now they're stuck. They're stuck with features that maybe they like or dislike, and it may or may not be what they really want. And it's really hard for them to move because it's so expensive for them to go to a move-up home because of where rates are today. So this is the matching problem. On the ability to remodel side, this is getting a whole lot of press. We're seeing this in a lot of the economic numbers that are coming out right now. Really severe issues. Real incomes are declining 2% year over year. The impact of that really can't be overstated. Home prices are moderating, as we already talked about. And then we have this significant increase in mortgage rates, faster on a basis point basis than anything we've seen in recent history. And this recession fear, which is very real, that's already happening globally. The U.S. is in a much better place, we think, than a lot of the other alternatives. But it is a very real fear, which does to impact the ability for people to pull the trigger on a remodeling project. If we just took the net impact of what's happening with real incomes and where we think home prices are going to be, the back of the envelope math that you'd normally use in a model would suggest that next year we would be thinking about normally a 15 to 25% temporary decline. A lot of that is timing and comp and deferral and remodeling spending. And a lot of that comes back later. And that's where the market's been focusing. I actually don't think that's the right number to think about. I'm going to show you a forecast a little bit later why, because of some of the mitigating factors that we have to think about. So despite the fact that real incomes are dropping, which people would normally fund remodeling from, there is excess savings, a whole lot, about a year's supply worth, that is slowing the effect of that decline in real income. There's record home equity right now with very low exposure to subprime. Who owns the equity tends to be the most wealthy cohort, who also have the most access to credit. And that's exactly who's been cashing out this year. And those are the projects that are being funded right now, underway, still coming into next year. And there's a baby boom that we need to talk about because it's really important, drives very different purchase decisions in the products in the home. And obviously very different configuration differences, which could lead to a wave of major either moves or significant big project major remodels like additions, which we'll talk about in a minute. So just very briefly, let's talk about some of those mitigating factors, because I don't feel like those are getting enough focus. We're getting a lot of focus on the changing macro condition near term because it's in the press. Here's some other things we need to think about. So as I mentioned, historically, if you're trying to think about which way home improvement spending would go, one of the most useful factors that you would look at is changes in real personal income. And it was really important in the ballpark of 2 to 3x, meaning a 1 or 2 point swing in real personal income would drive about 2 to 3 times the effect up or down in home improvement spending. So that's important since Q1, we've been seeing significant real income declines, more than 2% down. Normally this itself would drive between 5 and 7% negative year-over-year spending activity for home improvement spending. We have not seen that level of decline yet, although things are beginning to turn right now. Part of the reason why that we haven't seen a decline, we think has to do with what's going on with personal savings. So here's what I mean. If we go back to 2019 and look at the annual level of personal savings, at that point, this is pre-pandemic, a normal year would have been about 2.2 trillion. And we saw that some moderation between that before that, but 2.2 trillion is a good benchmark. What happened as soon as those initial stimulus payments came out when we were all locked down under COVID, some of that was spent, but a lot of it showed up as household savings. And there's a significant amount of savings that's been, kind of squirreled away, about 2 trillion cumulative excess savings. So that's, if you're reading that, that is about a year's worth of excess savings that's in place. That's been the case until about this time last year. But since the turn of January 2022, we've seen, along with incomes declining, we've seen households begin to save less than they normally would. And so what's really happening is we're seeing households begin to cut into some of that excess savings they had. The issue is that there's just so much savings that at the current pace of depletion, if they just continue the current run rate, we basically have about an extra year before the normal 2 to 3x impact of slowing real incomes would affect home improvement the way that we normally would expect it to. So right now we're in this kind of shock absorber stage where the total effect is not being felt by households. We will have to watch that very closely to see which way it goes. Here's how I think about those changes in income on home improvement spending. And I think this is really important as you think about different product categories. So our forecast is going to be enormously different between different building product categories. This is part of the reason why. I like to think about 3 different cohorts of homeowners. One cohort is the below 60,000 in income group. 32 million households is a lot of households. It's 40% of homeowners. They account for about a quarter of remodeling spending. Then you have this middle cohort, which earns more than 60K, but less than $100,000. That only accounts for about 20% of remodeling spending, just a bit below that. And then you have the larger income cohort, which is about 37% of homeowners over 100K. They account for about 58% of remodeling spending. So the reason that's important is when we look at who gets hurt the most by changes in real income, the first seeds of kind of demand destruction, if we want to use those words, happen in the below 60K segment because 80% of their spending is on non-discretionary categories that are facing, really significant rising prices, in some cases double digits. So they just have to walk away from the projects. These are also the group that has the least amount of home equity. So there's just fewer options for them, even when it comes to moving to a different home. That's the first group to abandon the idea of doing a remodel. In the middle and on the right-hand side, those who are a slightly higher income, in addition to having more assets and more income, also have just a lot more flexibility. 40% of their spending is on categories that are completely discretionary, that they can pull from and swap from. So when they're stuck in their home, they may choose to spend less on going out to eat and more on other categories. It's going to take that group a lot more of, and that also is the group that has excess savings, a lot more severe pain before they walk away from home improvement spending. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, this is the tabulation of the same breakdown between different types of remodeling projects exposed to those different income groups. So you can see that there's a whole number of projects that have not just exposure to the mid and the high, but a lot of exposure to the mid and the high. I like to pick on like outdoor decks and pools. Part of the reason that's such an interesting group is because who tends to do those projects are people who have a little bit nicer, newer homes, which I'll show you in a minute. It also means that these are going to cycle very, very differently. And I know we talk about roofing and HVAC and some of these categories being non-discretionary, and they are, You mean you do have to replace those things, but you can defer a roof job by several weeks or by several months. And on a year-over-year basis, what that looks like is a big decline in swing for maybe a quarter, which gets deferred to the following year. So one of the categories that I'm watching very closely that I think is an interesting balance of discretionary and non-discretionary is flooring, because it has a lot more exposure to that entry-level price point of consumer, especially LVT. It's very easy to do. There's less barriers to entry, and you can defer it pretty easily. So we're watching those numbers very closely. Again, this will show up in some of our forecast in 2023. One bit of context that I want to show you too, we did an experiment looking at the pipeline of planned remodels over the next 24 months, which very well could be the next 36 months too, because the households tend to respond to surveys asking about their intent. But basically what we found was we identified people who were planning on doing a project, found all about the type of project they're planning on doing. How much are they going to spend? Where are they going to pay for it? What type of project? Are they going to use a pro? And then once we had them nailed down, we hit them with a few surprise questions because we were confident that this was really a household that was planning on doing a remodel. And one of the questions we hit them with was, the scenario of suppose your household income just drops overnight by about 10%. And that's a somewhat arbitrary number, but it's anchored in history, what we've seen when some people work in the household. What would they do? A household could choose to pull the plug on the project entirely. They could choose to change the makeup or the mix of the project, or they could choose to postpone the project and then come back to it. That would be demand deferral, not demand destruction. Here's what we found. So under this hypothetical situation where we saw 10% real declines in income, where right now we're at -2%, and there's this big buffer of savings. But under that more severe scenario, 3% of households who are planning a project, these are already in the planning phase, would pull the pin and remove that project and cancel it altogether. It's a fairly small number. We also only saw 27% who said they would proceed just as they had planned, which is also a fairly small number. This means that only about less than a third of your potential pipeline is going to continue as planned. So this means we don't get complacent. If we think real income declines are going to happen, there's going to be some big changes. What will those changes be? Well, interestingly, it's split pretty evenly. About 97% of those planned remodels we believe will still occur, but about a third of them will be postponed in this scenario where people would have their income decline and then they postpone them until things kind of got back to normal. So this could be pushing off to a following year. This is exactly what we saw in the early 80s. A bunch of remodeling spending postponed, and then huge double-digit multi-year surges in home improvement spending. There's precedent for that. Another 36% of these planned projects, they would still continue the project on the same calendar, but there would be some mix shift. They might use less expensive products, less expensive materials, or potentially there could be a shift in the labor, which Matt's going to talk about in a minute. The one point I just want to make, we get a lot of questions, and I know Allie and her team get a ton of questions on these too, and I appreciate her perspective on this. Is this the mid-2000s? Remodeling fell pretty hard after the mid-2000s. One of the cases that we make against that is that there's very low prevalence of subprime activity going on. And if we look at who has the equity, which tends to be who is doing the remodels, well, it turns out that Q2 home equity loan origination and HELOC origination is not just up, but it's up a lot, not just double digits, but 30 to 40%. That tends to flow into projects that are happening right now. And the average price of those projects doubles when they happen. So we're seeing the very top end of the market still engage. Our sense is that there's some postponement until they feel the floor from a stability standpoint, from maybe a pricing standpoint, but they're absolutely still planning on engaging. Where we're going to see the weakness is on the bottom end of the market. So at this time, we'll pass it over to Matt, who will be talking about some of the blend that we're seeing in terms of that trade-off between pro and DIY. Matt, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Todd, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to take about 10 minutes to dig a bit deeper into DIY, both what we're seeing currently and some trends we see developing. We feel the topic is pretty timely with the financial challenges a lot of homeowners are facing, as Todd just talked about, along with the just perennial labor crunch. Those two factors we think are going to drive some changes. And so just to set the table, I'm going to talk about a large base quantitative study we did among homeowners who did projects in the past 2 years, either DIY or hired a pro. So let's jump right in. One moment, we just have a quick delay. Okay, so sorry about the delay there. So we asked homeowners what types of projects they did, and we were surprised and at times impressed by the types of things they were taking on. Most common were the basic low-cost projects, painting rooms, updating lighting. More than half the DIYers did those. Quickly followed by new major appliances. But then we also saw some more ambitious ones they were taking on. In that more than 30% of DIYers were actually doing fairly major remodels, including kitchens and basements. So certainly much more than the kind of the typical painting large big bar on the right. Some of them were really kind of digging in there. We also asked them what they spent on their projects. So this yellow bar represents cost of project. And we found a pretty clear negative correlation between project popularity and cost. And so despite the main motivator of saving money, DIYers are still mostly knocking out quick and inexpensive projects. And it's not because they don't want to save money. It's because a lot of the projects on the left here, which are much higher cost, tend to involve not only more skill, but also a lot more scale. So that's a whole lot of weekends if you're trying to do this as a side project. This next slide is a little bit different in that it includes all three of the project fulfillment methods. We usually talk about two in this area, right? We usually talk about DIY or hiring a pro, but we've started to tease out this hybrid middle ground where homeowners are conducting a project as a blend of both DIY and hiring a pro. And pretty interesting because you see the kind of the main DIY projects tend to be those straightforward, low-cost ones that we talked about earlier. But that light purple on the right, the blend, you see it really is really quite large at times, even rivaling the percent of pros who are handling projects. And so these squared off ones each are fulfilled more than 25% by this hybrid model. And they're meaty expensive ones, kitchen remodels, basement, garage additions and improvement, etc. So this is a pretty intriguing concept to us, just how big this blend trend is. And it's something that we're going to be unpacking a fair amount with our subscription research product that Todd talked about. So definitely stay tuned for more on this, but we did want to at least introduce it to everybody today. So we asked DIYers, why are you doing your projects? And of course, ROI wins, right? Everyone is going to say, it's money. I'm saving money, increasing my value 60%. But digging into it a little bit more really indicates there's a lot more happening here. For one, and Todd talked about that matching kind of stuck in your home concept that he introduced back in July. The projects are easier than moving. It's expensive to move right now. It's difficult. There's obviously the major factor of getting a much higher mortgage rate. And so a lot of folks are doing it out of sort of those mismatch issues. And the rest are really lifestyle shifts. And frankly, we think that's the big story here when it comes to DIY. Yes, ROI has 60%, but look at the rest of the factors here. It's really a blend of changing the requirements from your home. So we have the more discretionary ones, more recreational, just spending more time. And then we have the ones that are a little bit more necessity, We need, more private work from home, study from home spaces. The grandparents are moving back in, et cetera. So we're seeing people, of course, always want to save money, but also just requiring very different things about their home from their homes. And there's a question how much of this is COVID effect, how much of it is here to stay. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. So when it comes to changing the use of your home, we just showed a lot of folks are saying, I have more recreational requirements. I have more hobbies at home. I spend a lot more time at home. And so we wanted to dig into, what does that mean for the way that you're spending your money, not just your home improvement budget, but your overall household budget. And not surprisingly, we saw that about 2/3 of DIYers were funding their projects by shifting traditional entertainment money. So they were taking travel funds, dining out, events and shows, et cetera, and putting it into their homes. And, this hometainment concept has been really gaining traction. It's talked about in the food industry a lot. Frankly, I think this slide, indicates that it could be a very good thing for our industry. As people want more out of their homes, they're willing to invest more of their household budget in it. So this is for my marketing friends out there. Where are these DIYers learning? We asked their #1 information source, and yes, you see the smattering of traditional places, both media, brick and mortar experts. But the real story here is online, which we knew, but I frankly was even surprised just how much. And within online, it's YouTube. YouTube, almost half the people we surveyed said that is the #1 source for information nowadays, followed by just searching online. Take those two together, and that's more than 60%. It's kind of dwarfing the rest of the, learning information sources combined. So we like to break down the kind of the people behind the projects here, looking at DIYers versus those who hire a pro, and really understanding where they're different and where are they the same. Main difference we found was age. DIYers much more likely to be younger. So if you look at the far left cluster here, 25 to 34, DIYers are about twice as likely to be in that age group than folks who utilize a pro. Then go on the other side of the scale, 55 plus. That's where DIYers are making up for it. If all the folks are younger, they're only about half as likely to be 55 plus. Significant difference there. Definitely the biggest kind of demographic skew that we found. Education to a much smaller extent. There definitely is a minor skew towards college and post-grad among people who utilize a pro, but not significant, I would say. Definitely a lot less than age and less than income. We're also seeing income. You have to kind of look closely at this chart to understand how big the difference is, but go to the right there with the 150,000 plus. So this is household income. People who utilize pros are about twice as more likely to be 150 plus. And obviously that's an uncapped group, so that can get a lot higher than that. And so age is definitely the main difference we saw, followed by income and followed by education, but age by far the biggest difference. And then we also looked at just where are they the same? And it came to the household status. About 2/3 were married in both groups, whether they were doing DIY or utilizing a pro. And about half of each of those groups also had 1 to 2 children. So Todd talked earlier about the kind of the trends around home age, and we really wanted to split here. How is that different between pros and DIY? In a lot of senses, it's the same, but there were a couple of key differences. So you definitely see some clusters, some sweet spots, that homes that are 11 to 30 years old, whether it's pro or DIY, that is really the #1 time for projects to be happening. Skip ahead, homes that are much older, 41 to 70, are also getting another resurgence. Obviously, those are very different projects. We look at all this at the project level. We don't really have the I think bandwidth to go into that detail today, but that's when you start getting into the kind of major gut level type projects, very similar between DIY and pro. Where you start to see some differences around time in the home, although everyone is pretty active from 6 to 20 years of home ownership, you see the DIYers are actually getting a big head start. When the DIYers have been in there for 3 to 5 years, they're getting a real jump start on the projects. And, that looks to be a blend of who they are and, as well as the homes that they're buying. So one thing a little bit different on this one, if you look to the legend on the top, we've split DIYers on this slide to the typical DIYer who did 1 to 2 projects in the last 2 years. That was actually measured at about 1.5 was the median there. And then we split off the more serial DIYers of 3+. And like the income cohort we talked about earlier, it's 3+, but there were also plenty of people saying 5, 10, 15 projects in the last 2 years, believe it or not. And so we definitely saw some differences between these groups. So why are they DIYing? Again, saving money is always going to be that, that pragmatic choice, and it makes a lot of sense that people are picking right away. But again, it goes further. There's some real pragmatic reasons. Hiring a pro has been very difficult the last couple of years. Either very long wait, or you just can't get one. Your job's too small, not enough money to be made. So that was a factor. And then take a look at this box around the I trust myself to do a better job than a professional. There are a lot of serial DIYers that think they can do a better job than the pro they're hiring even. So another sort of cluster of reasons is more around just the enrichment factor. This is really important, again, for marketers and others to think of as you're selling DIY products. Learning new skills, whatever type of DIYer you are, about half of that group really wants to learn from this. It's an experience. It's not just saving money. And then again, the real pop you see with the serial DIYers around a sense of accomplishment. 60% saying that is a reason they DIY their projects. Important to understand as you sort of speak to these customers and take them through the journey. Real briefly on this one, when we look at sort of the continuum of utilizing a pro to typical DIYer to serial DIYer, very clear trend here that the serial DIYers are just more active all around. It's not just DIY projects. This is just an active group of people, whether it's being outdoors, music, games, etc. And we also asked them what type of jobs they have, and they're definitely more likely to have a physical job in the first place. So that's today. Where do we see it going? How has your interest changed from 3 years ago in doing DIY projects? And so about half the yellow group here said, no change, what I did before, I'm going to keep doing. But then a little more than half said that they did have a shift happening. And look at this 38% group versus the 17. The 38 are people saying that they are more likely to lean into DIY versus the 17 saying they're more likely to hire a pro. This shows a lot more people going into the DIY camp. We asked why they were going to do that. No editing, no summary bubbles here. It was pretty clear. And this is pretty fresh research. We just did this in the last month, so obviously economic concerns are probably weighing more heavily than than a couple of years back. So Todd talked about the specter of facing financial adversity. You'll recognize these sort of answers. They were the same ones that he asked before. What we wanted to do, though, was add in the DIY factor. And I think we would call this a blend trend and a DIY trend. The number one reason with this group was postponing. Faced with major adversity, whether it was salary dropping considerably or costs rising considerably, a third said they would postpone the project. But the next reason was shifting it to DIY or that blend of DIY and professional. We found this to be another pretty intriguing finding. There's a lot of discussion around trading down materials, like Todd talked about earlier, going from a premium siding to a standard, or even going from a standard to an economy. And that's still real. A lot of people were saying that, but even more said they were going to trade down labor. And this feels like another trend that we're going to need to really unpack more, because it's the first we've really seen this, and it makes sense, and we know all of the money reasons people are doing these in the economy that we're living in. So we expect to see more and more of a shift in the next couple of years, and we will be measuring it closely. So that's all we had. That's all I have for today. I'm going to hand things back to Todd.
All right, thank you, Matt. So just getting into a little bit of longer term context, I think this is important. We get a lot of questions around 2023. Where's the market going right now? What will the cadence look like by quarter next year? What we also need to balance that with is the broader picture of how should we think about 2024 to 2030, call it. What's the basic context? Should we be expecting a continued decline, flat, a bounce? I want to give you a little bit of context for how we're approaching that. The first has to do with the impact of the age of the housing stock. And in general, I think we've seen a lot of investors talk about this, and the idea was very high level. The idea being, as more homes get older, there will continue to be more spending. What they're thinking of is the numbers that we have here for gut rehab. The way to read these numbers would be homes that are very, very old, like 70 years old or more, do 45% more gut rehabs than the typical US home. Okay, this is not a big surprise. This is how most people think about home improvement. What I want to show you that is surprising to some is how different some of the individual product categories perform, because it gives us a really unique story coming into 2024 to 2030, especially the next 2 years. Here's one. So if we look at the outdoor space, think of doing a deck, doing a patio, any type of backyard improvement. By far, this is not a story about the aging housing stock. The data shows us that the primary group of households that are going to be investing in the outdoor space are fairly new homes, built less than 5 years ago, basically new homes that have not yet had their yard improved. And you typically have more wealthy households that have purchased those homes, that now have a little bit of equity and they want to continue to improve the yard. Huge lift. That's a little bit of an outlier. Let's look at 3 other categories that I think need to be on your radar. Really unique stories here. Exterior finishes, the indoor space. Think of improving flooring or the interiors of your home, kitchen and bath, or systems and efficiency, your HVAC system and the like. What I want to highlight here is the unique and distinct lift that happens as homes crest that 20-year age threshold to, say, middle-aged homes that are below 50, but at 20 to 40 to 49-year-old band. That is the sweet spot for a lot of discretionary home improvement spending, because the interior fit and finish, the exterior fit and finish all wear out at the same time. This is important because, as we said before, we are lapping all those homes that were built in the early 2000s right about now. And none of this is deferral, or none of this was pull forward because of what happened during COVID. This is all incremental over the next few years. So to give you a sense of where this is leaving us, there will be about 15 to 20% more homes that are in this critical, call it tranche of prime remodel years by 2025 versus where they were during COVID. So this is structurally going up. None of this has been pulled forward. It's a timing question of when it comes to bear. So this is a one check mark in the side of postpone remodeling with a strong bounce as soon as prices stabilize. Here's another one, really big deal. A new NBER research paper came out about 2 weeks ago. I think it's actually still a working paper form, so there's some revisions that'll still happen. Really important implications for home improvement. 3 big surprises here. You should read it yourself, but here's 3 big conclusions. Number 1, so the overall US fertility rate, maybe as you know, was declining since 2007, which would have been the time when the last financial crisis kicked off. It looks like that reversed. It reversed since January of 2021, which would have been 9 months roughly after COVID began. What's really important is who's giving birth. And I think this matters a lot because of how it ties to home improvement. The baby bump was mostly pronounced among women who are ages 30 to 34. and women with a college education. So if you think back around our discussions about 5 years ago, thinking about when will people choose to go form households, at what point will people choose to go, get into a single family home or buy an existing home and choose to remodel it. This is a huge indicator because this demographic, women, in their 30s with a college education, is the ideal group to get into a home and do some incremental spending and improvement on the home that they buy. So that lift is big. And the order of magnitude here, the lift is really, really big. The graph at the left shows what the deviation was from trend. The most recent numbers are 10% higher than trend and accelerating. The last point that I just want to highlight, this appears to be accelerating even more as we get into Q3 of 2022. So this is really important for the home improvement space. And I'll just give you one example. We don't have time to go through all of this, but we'll definitely be diving into this in our building product outlook. So if we just think about one part of the home, and that would be the bathroom. This is an interesting example. I like picking on entry-level buyers because entry-level buyers don't have a lot of money. But if we take an entry-level buyer couple, we have this great survey data that Molly Carmichael on our advisory team did, collecting consumer product choices in the home. If we take young couples that are entry-level buyers, they don't have a lot of money, and we do nothing with that household except they have a baby. What that move itself does is it moves that young couple to the young family mode, and it drives about 9 incremental points of adoption for just adding the shower and tub. That's at a $2,500 premium. That is the #1 buyer group for having a shower plus tub combo among the entry-level buyers, just because they have a baby. That's a big swing in product demand. And so we have this unique backdrop where people have gotten into homes in recent years, and we think have a relatively poor fit with the existing features, especially as they develop to have families. That's going to drive a future wave of remodeling. The timing's a little bit in question. But just to give you a sense of how we're getting our arms around this, I don't know if you've seen any real life home purchases that looked like this photo, where basically, this would have been the case from about a year and a half ago, when you have, a home for sale. There's never been fewer homes for sale in the history of the data. And then all these buyers descend, maybe over a weekend, multiple offers placed. Do you believe that these buyers, when they are buying their home, are really finding the home with the perfect features and exactly in the right location and exactly the right, amenities and features of the home for their family's needs? Or are they buying the home because they need to find a home and they're worried about being left out? And this is almost the reverse of what happened with mortgage originators in the mid-2000s, where, we get down on these mortgage originators because we feel that they didn't do their homework. And yet now we have this wave of incoming home buyers over the last few years who basically, in some cases, bought homes not even inspected, just bought the home to get in, basically to beat the other buyers. And now we're surprised that they may or may not be satisfied with the home. So we thought we had to try to measure how, to what extent this was important for home improvement. And we found some really important findings. Here's what we found. So just to give you a little bit of background, we basically, once we found out people were who they said they were and then they were in our home, we wanted to measure how much dissatisfaction they had in their home, realizing that most of us have some part of our home that we'd like to change. But here's what we did. We sent them a survey on their mobile phone. They could slide their thumb to the left or the right, basically tell us how much they feel that they got exactly the perfect home, or whether or not they got a home that they had to settle with to some degree. And what we found was really striking. About 2 to 1, people felt that they had to settle for some feature in their home because they either couldn't find a home with the right features, or they just couldn't afford the home with the right features, versus that they generally got the home that they wanted. Only 4% of people got the home that they said was, the perfect rating of exactly what they wanted. So if you're doing the math, it's 96% felt that there's some sort of improvement they want to do in their home. What was really striking about these results was that very small differences in discontent were really good predictors of the planned pipeline of home improvement spending. So if someone said that they were just mildly discontented, or they're mildly felt that they had, generally gotten a pretty good fit of their home, more on the content side than discontent side, a 14-point swing, which is a fairly small difference in rating, was enough to move a household, once we controlled for other factors, from not planning to do a remodel to absolutely planning on doing a remodel. And they can tell you exactly what they're going to do and how much they're going to spend and what they're going to do next, like planning the project. So small amounts of discontent tend to fester, and tend to drive future remodeling projects. This is a formula for deferred remodeling spending. By the way, if you had 20 points of discontent, that would drive the person out of the home altogether. They might move and find a better home, which is really hard to do when mortgage rates are 7% and people are priced out of a move up. So we have a lot of people stuck with festering discontent in their home. And as an example of this, I'd like to show this photo. Do you remember when COVID first hit? A lot of us were working from home. There was these kind of romantic ideas about how we could work from home and our young ones would be nearby, or other family. We could just look around the corner and there would be someone. Have you tried this in practice? It's more tricky than it seems. And the reason that I bring this up, it turns out that we're able to measure really well exactly who was discontented with their home, or moderately, enough discontented that it was important to drive a remodeling project. Here's what we found. If someone bought one of those homes that was over 20 years old that we talked about, that would have had outdated interiors and kind of eligible for a remodel, automatically that household is 3 points more likely to be discontented with their home. And we don't need 3 points. We need 14 points. Just a small amount will drive them to the remodel threshold. If someone works from home, automatically we give them another 3 points per the data of discontent. And interestingly, if it's a couple and both people work from home, that does double. It scales 1-to-1, so 6 points of discontent if both work from home. If the home buyer was younger than 44 years old, add another 6 points of discontent. Again, if we cumulatively get to 14 points of discontent, they likely are already planning a remodeling project. It's just a question of timing. If they have a child schooling from home right now, it almost gets them to a remodel on its own. It's 13 points of discontent. And if they bought a home in the last 2 years at all on its own, that's 14 points of discontent. So cumulatively, these can stack up pretty quick, or we have households that maybe they're in a home now, they bought a home the last few years, but now there's this underlying festering dissatisfaction with the poor fit and finish of the features, and there haven't been many options, and they can't move to another home because they're now priced out. We have a backdrop for a wave of home improvement spending like we saw in the early 80s and like we saw in cycles before that once prices stabilized. And by the way, when we ask people who are discontent with their home, what are you going to do? What type of remodeling project are you going to do? They skew really big, expensive projects. Think of redoing your entire basement or adding an addition to the home, which is the most expensive project you can do. We gave them as an option minor kitchen remodels where you're not replacing the cabinets, or you're just kind of updating the materials and the faces. What they tell us they want to do is not that. They want to do the big project. They want to remove walls around and replace cabinets. It's just a question of timing and ability to pay. So we view this as deferred demand. I think there's a strong case for deferred demand. Next year could cycle. Here's our forecast. 2023, we break it down by 3 product categories. Think of smaller project maintenance and repair, down 10% in project volume. Mid-price remodeling down 3% in project volume. This is count of projects. And major remodels and additions where you're moving walls around and spending, say, over $35,000 will likely be down 14% next year. That's in volume. In dollars, it'll be a little bit of a different story. We think the maintenance and repair will only be down 3%, mid-price remodeling up 3%, because you're getting a little bit of mix shift from those major additions, doing some mid-price remodeling. And big project remodeling, major remodels and additions, really down 8%. And this is going to look really different by quarter. We have a quarterly buildup, which our building product outlook subscribers will get. We also had this worked out for 2024 and beyond that. So we have a lot of perspective around the shape and pace of the bounce. Here's the big takeaway from a forecast standpoint that we want you to come away with. So you should be planning for a cyclical slowdown in next year for home improvement. But think of it as remodeling being relatively attractive versus other segments in the long run. So 4 key points to come away with. Number 1, now is not the time to get complacent. If you have revenue that looks pretty healthy, we're seeing unprecedented volatility in the leading indicators for remodeling spending. Think of like income shifts, things like that, that are indicating we're going to see big moves next year. It's going to look really different by quarter, but get really tight on the specifics of what you believe about your forecast, which we can help you with. We're going to see a lot of movement next year. That said, building products revenue, whatever, if you sell to new construction, whatever your starts forecast is, and we have a new starts forecast that just dropped, our building products forecast will fare 7 to 9% better than housing starts just due to timing. All those deferred projects that are mid-construction right now, multifamily projects that are started this year will dollarize next year. This even is with some cancellations. This is going to lead some building product companies to think that they are winning, that they are gaining share, and that they are somehow immune from the cycle until that pipeline slows, and it will. We have a view of when it might, but it's going to be a story you're going to see play out early next year. Third, this blend of DIY and pro, a shift of hybrid projects remains underrated for 2023 and 2024. That's going to show up as big differences between the channels, huge differences between some of the individual manufacturers who have more exposure to one versus the other. And we're going to be monitoring that pretty closely, including monitoring who has preferable exposure from a brand standpoint and category standpoint to each of those. And then lastly, and I think this is important, zooming out, thinking about the decade of 2020 to 2030, the underlying fundamentals are really, really unique. You have this backdrop of unprecedented count of homes that are outdated. You have this backdrop of a lot of deferred discontent in the home with poor matching and people reaching new life stages, especially with young children being added to the mix. We think it could be a setup for a higher level of remodeling, which would look like the golden age of remodeling, but with a recession stuck in the middle. And we're at the point right now where we're at that cyclical slowdown, likely with a recession. What this implies is a really interesting story around a bounce once prices stabilize. And there is precedent for that, which happened in the early 80s. Like I said, over 20% at a minimum, some cases more. We've got a lot of work done on this. So big conclusion, maintenance and repair will get hit over the next 18 months hard, down 10% in project volume. It'll do better from a pricing standpoint. The sweet spot for the next 12 months is in the mid-range remodels. And then I go to big project spending. That's a really interesting category. This is not 2008. Don't talk about it like it's the mid-2000s. This is a very different story that's playing out. And the historical data does support a 20% bounce at least once prices stabilize. So you better have a good assumption about when you think prices will stabilize and begin to move back down. So please, I think we can do maybe one or two questions. Stay on until the end of the webinar. There's a quick survey we'd love to have you take. But we do have time for a question or two. Let's go do that now.
So Todd, we did not have any come in yet. We can leave the line open for another 30 seconds if anyone wants to type any in that we can address.
Oh, with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and shut down the webinar? Thank you everyone for joining. You have our contact info. Reach out if you have any questions.